My brother stole my company. After Dad died and framed me for fraud. So I got him arrested and now own everything while he sits in jail. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I've always known my brother Mason was the favorite. Not because anyone ever said it out loud, just in the quiet ways that add up over a lifetime. The way my dad's eyes lit up when Mason walked into a room. The way my mom bragged about him like he was her trophy son. And the way I always felt like the placeholder. The reliable one. The one who didn't need praise because you already know we love you. If you've been the overlooked child, you know exactly what I mean. Our dad built a small manufacturing company from scratch. Late nights, burned fingers, and decades of sacrifice. Growing up, I admired him more than anyone else on earth. He used to stand in that warehouse with his hands on his hips and say, "One day, you boys will run all this." But even then, it felt like he was talking to Mason while looking in my direction. Mason got the spotlight, I got the broom. He attended business dinners, shaking hands like a natural-born CEO. I was in the back fixing machines, running inventory, learning the business from the ground up. Dad always told me, "Son, you're the backbone," but somehow that never translated into being treated like an equal. Then, Dad got sick. Really sick. And everything shifted, except for Mason. While I was making late-night drives to the hospital, warming soup, helping Dad shower, Mason was in Miami, Vegas, anywhere that wasn't home. I tried not to resent him, but every time I saw Dad wince in pain as he whispered, "Thank you for being here," I felt something inside me crack. One night, while I was adjusting his pillows, Dad took my hand and said quietly, "When I'm gone, you'll inherit the majority of the company. You're the only one who's proven you can handle it." I nodded, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified. What I didn't know was that this conversation, this one secret, would be the spark that lit a war I never wanted to fight. I found out Dad was gone at 5:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact minute because I was sitting in the hospital hallway with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the floor tiles, when the nurse gently touched my shoulder. Her voice was soft, too soft. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry." The world didn't crash or explode or fall apart dramatically. It just dimmed, like someone turned down the brightness on my entire life. I called Mason first, even though a part of me didn't want to. He answered with music blasting in the background, sounding annoyed, like I was interrupting something. "What?" he snapped. "It's Dad," I whispered. "He passed." There was a pause, one that felt like hope, like maybe he'd finally show up for something real. Then he sighed and said, "Damn, okay, I'll fly in later," before hanging up. I handled everything. The doctor forms, the release papers, the funeral arrangements. I picked the suit Dad would wear. I chose the casket. I stood alone in the funeral home lobby signing checks with trembling hands. People kept asking, "Where's Mason?" I kept answering, "On the way," even though I had no idea if he actually was. He arrived 30 minutes before the service ended. Sunglasses, designer suit, perfect hair. He walked straight past me, straight past Dad's casket, and immediately cornered Mom. I heard him hiss, "What did Dad leave me?" Like the ink on the death certificate wasn't even dry. When the lawyer gathered us after the funeral, my stomach twisted. I already knew what Dad had told me in confidence, but hearing it aloud, Mason receiving 20% of the company while I received the controlling share, made the air in the room feel radioactive. Mason's face went red first, then purple. "You manipulated him," he spat. "There's no way he chose you over me." Mom tried to calm him, but he shoved her hand away. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frames on the wall shook. That was the moment I realized losing Dad wasn't the end of my pain. It was just the beginning. Walking back into the company after the funeral felt surreal, like stepping into a life that had kept moving without me. The machines hummed, the forklifts beeped, the smell of metal and oil lingered in the air, but everything felt heavier. Dad used to fill this place with his voice, his presence, his steady confidence. Now there was just an ache. I tried to bury myself in work because grieving didn't feel like an option. Someone had to keep things running. But the shift was immediate. People whispered when I walked through the hallways. Conversations cut off mid-sentence the moment I got close. Even our floor manager, a guy who used to treat me like a nephew, kept avoiding eye contact. I finally confronted him, asking, "Is something wrong?" He swallowed hard and said, "Mason's been talking." I felt my chest tighten. "What's he saying now?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. He hesitated before responding, that your dad wasn't in his right mind, that you pressured him to change the will. I felt like someone had punched me square in the ribs. The manipulation, the twisting of reality. It was so classically Mason, it almost felt predictable. Almost. But then the clients started calling. One after another, scheduled meetings suddenly needed to be postponed. A longtime partner emailed me saying they had concerns about recent leadership transitions. That phrase, recent leadership transitions, felt like a knife. None of them said it outright, but I could tell Mason had been busy poisoning the well. Then came the blow. I didn't see coming. Our accountant, Mr. Rudd, a man who knew numbers like most people know their own children, pulled me aside. His face was pale, like he'd seen something he shouldn't have. He closed his office door, sat down, and slid a folder toward me. "There's something wrong with the accounts," he said quietly. "And if I didn't know better, I'd say someone is trying to make it look like you're stealing." The room spun for a moment, because suspicion hurts, but deliberate sabotage? That's a wound you don't recover from easily. I sat across from Mr. Rudd with the folder in my hands, my palms already sweating before I even opened it. The office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and the blinds were half closed, slicing sunlight into thin, uneasy lines across the desk. For a moment, neither of us spoke, just the quiet buzz of the fluorescent light above us. When I finally flipped open the folder, the blood drained from my face. There were withdrawals, transfers, and invoices I had never authorized, all stamped with my digital signature. It felt like looking at a crime scene where I was the murderer and the victim at the same time. "I didn't do any of this," I whispered. My voice cracked in a way I hated. Mr. Rudd leaned forward, fingers laced, his brow furrowed. "I know," he said. "That's why I called you, but whoever did this, they knew exactly how to make it look like you." I stared at the spreadsheets, feeling the walls of the office shrink in around me. As he talked through the transactions, my mind drifted back to Mason, to the smug smile he wore during the will reading, to the whispers he spread among employees, to the way he walked into the building like he was waiting for an opportunity to pounce. I could practically hear his voice saying, "You're overwhelmed, little brother. Maybe it's time someone else steps in." "Is this enough to trigger an audit?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Mr. Rudd sighed. "Yes, and once the bank flags it, law enforcement won't be far behind." A sharp knock at the door made both of us jump. I opened it to find Mason standing there, leaning against the frame with a smirk. "Everything okay in here?" he asked casually, but his eyes were calculating, like he already knew what we'd found, like he was waiting for this moment. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Somewhere deep in my gut, a truth clicked into place. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. And Mason was just getting started. The next morning, I arrived early, hoping to get ahead of whatever disaster was unfolding. But when I walked through the front doors, Mason was already there, standing in the lobby like a king returning to his throne. He wore one of his tailored suits, the kind he never bought with his own money, and greeted employees with bright, performative enthusiasm. "Miss me," he joked, giving finger guns to the receptionist. Everyone laughed a little too quickly, a little too nervously, and just like that, he slipped, effortlessly back into a role he was never meant to have. I approached him, keeping my voice steady. "What are you doing here, Mason?" He turned, smile widening like he'd been waiting for this confrontation. "Just stepping up," he said. "Someone has to, especially with all these issues popping up." His eyes flicked toward a group of employees as if to make sure they were watching, as if he wanted the audience. I lowered my voice. "We need to talk, privately." For a second, something cold flashed behind his smile. Then he followed me into Dad's old office, my office now, and shut the door behind him. I barely had time to speak before he held up his hand dramatically. "Look," he said, "I know things are tough. You're overwhelmed, emotional, maybe not thinking straight." The condescension in his tone made my jaw clench. I stepped closer. "Cut the crap, Mason. Did you mess with the accounts?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Wow. You really think you can blame me for your screw-ups?" Then he leaned in until his breath brushed my ear. "Walk away now, little brother, before things get messy." A chill snaked down my spine. This wasn't him teasing, or competing, or even trying to scare me. This was a threat. Quiet, calculated, and terrifying. Before I could respond, he pulled back and flashed that polished smile again. "Anyway," he said loudly as he opened the door, "I'll be taking the lead on a few projects, just until you get your head on straight." He walked out like the place already belonged to him, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't just sabotaging me. He was replacing me. 2 days later, just as I was trying to untangle Mason's mess, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered, hoping it wasn't another client canceling. "Mr. Carter?" a formal voice replied. "This is Linda from First State Bank. We're calling regarding suspicious withdrawals from your corporate account." My stomach dropped. There was a ringing in my ears as she explained that multiple large transactions, totaling tens of thousands, had been flagged under my authorization. I gripped my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't authorize anything," I managed. Linda paused, her voice softening. "Sir, your digital signature was used. We need you to come in." I felt myself go cold, my signature, my login, my account. Mason's warning, "Walk away before things get messy," echoed in my skull. It suddenly felt like he'd been narrating the crime he was about to pin on me. When I walked into the lobby at the bank, 2 police officers stood waiting. Not aggressively, not handcuffs out, but present, watching me. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, we'd like to ask you a few questions about possible corporate fraud." People in the lobby turned to stare, whispering behind their hands. I felt exposed, like I'd been stripped bare in public. At the company later that day, Mason strolled out of the break room right as the officers followed me inside. He raised his eyebrows innocently. "Whoa, what's going on?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. One of the officers asked if we could speak in my office. Mason crossed his arms and leaned against the wall like he was watching a show. During the questioning, I explained everything: the documents, the unauthorized transactions, the tampered spreadsheets. But the officer finally said the words I dreaded: Right now, the evidence points directly to you." I heard someone gasp outside the door. When the officers left, employees avoided me like I was radioactive. Even our receptionist kept her distance. That night, my phone buzzed, Mom calling. "Mason just told me what you did," she cried. "How could you bring this shame on us?" Her words gutted me in a way the accusations didn't, because now it wasn't just my company at risk, it was my name. I barely slept after the bank incident. Instead, I lay awake replaying every conversation, every warning sign, every smug look Mason had given me. By morning, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me running on fumes. Still, I dragged myself to the office, desperate for some kind of control. But the second I parked my car, I saw something that made me freeze mid-step. Mason was standing outside with our father's former lawyer, Mr. Hall, talking like old friends. I ducked behind a pillar, feeling equal parts pathetic and terrified. Their voices drifted across the parking lot in clipped, hushed tones. "I told you I can't push the challenge through if the will was properly witnessed," Mr. Hall said. Mason scoffed, "Then make it look like it wasn't." That was the deal. My jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth might crack. What deal? What challenge? Mr. Hall lowered his voice, but I strained to hear every syllable. "You need to understand. If anyone finds out I was paid to delay the probate process, I lose everything." Mason rolled his eyes. "Relax. I'm the one taking the fall if this goes sideways. My brother's too stupid to figure it out anyway." My vision blurred for a second. Not from anger, but from the stunning realization that this wasn't spontaneous sabotage. This had been months in the making, maybe longer. Mason stepped closer to the lawyer. "We're almost there. Once he's out of the picture, I'll take over. He's already under investigation. They'll drag him off in handcuffs before he knows what hit him." A cold wave washed over me. He wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation. He was planning to erase me from my own life. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and hit record. Every word, every threat, every detail. I captured it all. It wasn't enough to clear me yet, but it was the first real proof I had. As they wrapped up their conversation, Mason clapped the lawyer on the back and said, "Next time, use the side entrance. We can't be seen together again." I sank back behind the pillar, heart pounding. The worst part wasn't what I heard. It was realizing this was only the surface of whatever Mason was really doing. The next week felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every morning, I hoped I'd unlock my office door and discover everything had been a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, reality kept hitting harder. I arrived one morning to find a security guard waiting for me in the lobby, someone Dad hired years ago, someone who used to bring me donuts on my birthday. He looked ashamed as he said, "Sir, I've been instructed to escort you to HR." My stomach twisted into a knot I couldn't undo. In the HR conference room, the director slid a thick envelope across the table. "We're placing you on temporary suspension," she said carefully, like speaking too loudly might shatter me. "Pending investigation into company fund mismanagement." She wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt almost as much as the words. I signed the paperwork with a hand that barely felt attached to my body. When I stepped outside the room, Mason was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, grinning like a wolf who had finally cornered his prey. "Tough break, little bro," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. The contact felt toxic, like it burned right through my shirt. That's what happens when you're irresponsible. Someone has to clean up your mess. I wanted to yell, to throw the truth in his face, to expose everything I knew. But I had no solid proof yet, at least not the kind that would hold up legally. I watched him stroll into the CEO office, Dad's office, then my office, and close the door behind him. Employees hovered nearby, whispering. Some looked guilty, some relieved, others just scared. Every step I took toward the exit felt like I was walking out of my own life. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Mason told us what you did. You're breaking this family apart. Please stop embarrassing us." I sank into the driver's seat, shaking. For the first time since Dad died, I felt completely alone, abandoned, unwanted, and falsely painted as the villain in a story I never chose to be part of. That night, staring at my ceiling, it finally hit me. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. The morning after my suspension, I woke up with a heaviness I'd never felt before. Not grief, not fear, something colder. A kind of clarity that only comes when life has already stripped you down to the bone. If Mason wanted to destroy me, he should have finished the job, because now I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was going to fight back. I pulled out my laptop, opened every company file I still had offline access to, and started digging. Hours blurred as I combed through old emails, document versions, and system logs. Most of it looked normal, until I found a series of drafts in my sent folder that I never wrote. Requests for wire transfers. Messages authorizing urgent payments. My name, my signature, my exact writing style, recreated almost perfectly. "Mason," I whispered, feeling something inside me break and harden at the same time. I needed help, but I couldn't trust employees, not after the way they scattered from me like I carried a plague. So I called Mr. Rudd, the accountant. His voice was low, hesitant. "I shouldn't get involved, but I know you're not lying." He met me after hours in a parking lot, handing me a USB drive. "I recovered deleted transaction logs," he said. "But be careful. If Mason finds out, he'll bury both of us." That night, I transferred the last of my savings to hire a private investigator. A guy named Monroe, who looked like he stepped out of a noir movie. Gruff voice, sharp eyes, zero sugarcoating. After hearing my story, he nodded once and said, "If your brother's running a scheme, I'll find the skeletons." 3 days later, he called me. "You might want to sit down," he said. Turns out multiple shell companies, created months before Dad even died, were registered under the name of Mason's girlfriend, Kara, and 2 of them were receiving funds siphoned from our company. I stared at the documents Monroe sent, my heart pounding like thunder. This wasn't just sabotage. This was orchestrated, premeditated theft. And if Kara was involved, then Mason wasn't working alone. I was sitting in my apartment surrounded by printouts, financial logs, shell company registrations, forged email drafts, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. For a split second, I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to pick up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. A shaky voice whispered, "Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you about Mason." My entire body went still. Her name was Erica, one of the junior administrative assistants. She sounded terrified, like she was calling from inside a burning building. "Can we meet?" she asked. "Somewhere away from the office. I shouldn't be talking to you, but I can't keep this in anymore." We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and sticky booths. She sat across from me, hands trembling around a cup of coffee she didn't drink. "Mason made us do it," she whispered, leaning in. I frowned. "Do what?" She swallowed hard. "The statements, the reports, Her voice cracked. "The accusations against you, he made us sign them." My chest tightened painfully. She dug into her bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through screenshots, recordings, emails, internal messages from Mason himself. One recording made my blood run cold. Mason's voice, smooth and threatening, saying, "If you want to keep your job, you'll sign what I tell you to sign. He's going down either way. Don't be stupid and go down with him." I felt sick, not just from the betrayal, but from the sheer cruelty of it, the manipulation, the way he weaponized people's fear to build a false case against me. "There's more," Erica whispered, sliding her phone across the table. A video, Mason in my office, rifling through files, photographing documents, plugging a USB device into my computer. The timestamp? The night before the first fraudulent transactions appeared. My hands shook as I watched. "It's not enough to clear you on its own," Erica said, voice wavering. "But it proves he planted evidence. I thought you should have it, before he destroys you completely." I leaned back, breath unsteady. With this, the PI's findings, and the recorded conversation with the lawyer, I finally had a real chance. But Mason wasn't going to go down quietly, and I could feel the storm closing in. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mason smirk, heard the officer's words, "The evidence points to you," and felt the crushing weight of losing everything Dad trusted me to protect. But now, for the first time since this nightmare began, I had something Mason didn't expect. Proof. Real, tangible, undeniable proof. By morning, my fear had hardened into resolve. I gathered everything, screenshots, recordings, documents, the PI's files, and drove to the Financial Crimes Division. The detective who met me, Detective Lawson, looked exhausted, like he'd seen one too many broken families. He motioned for me to sit and said, "Okay, start from the beginning." And so I did. 2 hours passed as I laid everything on the table, piece by piece. When I finished, my throat burned and my hands were shaking. Lawson didn't speak for a long moment. He just stared at the mountain of evidence between us. The shell companies under Kara's name, the forged messages, the recordings of Mason threatening employees, the video of him breaking into my office. Finally, he leaned back and exhaled a low whistle. "If even half of this checks out," he murmured, "your brother is in serious trouble." He looked up at me, eyes steady. "We're opening a criminal investigation, effective immediately." I nodded, but a cold weight sat in my chest. Knowing the truth wasn't the same as being free from the lies. "What do I do now?" I asked. Lawson closed the file. "Stay put. Don't contact him. Don't tip him off. And whatever you do, don't let him know we're involved." Walking out of the precinct felt surreal. The air outside was crisp, the sky painfully bright. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. But then my phone buzzed. A text from Mason. "We need to talk. Urgent." My pulse spiked. Had someone leaked something? Did he sense the walls closing in? I stared at my screen, feeling the pressure of the next move tightening around my throat. Whatever this urgent talk was going to be, it wouldn't be friendly. I didn't respond to Mason's message. Detective Lawson's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't tip him off." So, I left the text unread and tried to breathe through the rising panic. But panic turned to dread the next morning when I pulled into the company parking lot and saw a crowd gathered near the entrance. Employees stood in clusters, whispering, their eyes darting anxiously toward the glass doors. I felt an instinctive chill climb up my spine. Before I could step closer, a line of police vehicles rolled into the lot. Lights flashing silently, sirens off. The kind of arrival that meant they weren't there for a disturbance. They were here for a person. Officers stepped out, purposeful and coldly efficient. Detective Lawson was with them. He gave me the smallest nod, permission to stay, but not to interfere. Inside the main lobby, Mason was holding court like always, laughing with a couple of employees, leaning against the reception desk like he owned gravity. The second the officers poured through the doors, the room dropped to a dead silence. Mason turned, confused. Can I help you?" he asked, voice wavering in a way I'd never heard before. Detective Lawson stepped forward. "Mason Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a stack of papers. Mason's eyes snapped to me instantly, wild, disbelieving, furious. "What did you do?" he barked as two officers pulled his hands behind his back. "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "You did." He struggled, voice rising. "You set me up. This is a mistake. I'm innocent." But Lawson cut him off. "Save it for your lawyer." The click of the handcuffs echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. As they marched him out, employees scrambled out of the way. Some stared, some whispered, a few wouldn't even look at me. But others, people who had avoided me for weeks, stood straighter, guilt flickering across their faces. Through the glass doors, I watched Mason get pushed into the back of the police car, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. For the first time in months, he wasn't in control, and for the first time in my life, I finally was. The day after Mason's arrest, the company felt eerily quiet, like everyone was waiting to see what came next. People who had avoided me for weeks suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Some mumbled awkward greetings. Others offered stiff nods as if unsure whether I was a victim or someone to fear. I didn't blame them. Mason had woven a convincing web of lies. But walking through those hallways, seeing my father's legacy tainted by this mess, made something inside me ache. I wanted Dad here more than ever, just to tell me I wasn't failing him. Later that week, Detective Lawson called me into the precinct. I sat in the same small interview room where they once implied I might be a criminal. This time, Lawson walked in with a stack of files and a relieved expression. "Good news," he said, pulling up a chair. "You've been officially cleared of all accusations." I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until it rushed out of me all at once. Hearing those words felt like getting my life back. He walked me through the findings. Digital forensics proved the transfers were done from Mason's devices. The shell companies linked directly to Kara. The forged email drafts were traced to Mason's IP address. Employees corroborated Erica's statements about coercion and threats. And the video of him in my office sealed everything. "You're not just innocent," Lawson said. "You're the victim of a very calculated crime." Victim. The word stung, but it was the truth. When I returned to the company the next day, the board called an emergency meeting. They offered formal apologies, some sincere, some painfully forced. But the biggest shock came when our head director cleared his throat and said, "We'd like to reinstate you as the rightful CEO, effective immediately." I felt a wave of emotion crash over me. Relief, grief, anger, gratitude. Dad had trusted me with everything, and for a moment it felt like I'd redeemed that trust. The hardest part, though, came later that evening. Mom called. Her voice was broken, trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to believe he could do something like this." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. Forgiveness was possible, but forgetting wasn't. Stepping back into the CEO office felt surreal. Dad's old leather chair still had that faint smell of aftershave, like he'd only just stepped away. I ran my hand along the desk he'd built himself from reclaimed oak. Scratches, dents, memories. For a moment, it felt like he was standing behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder the way he used to when I was a kid. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself. This wasn't just an office. It was the beating heart of everything he'd worked for. The first order of business was stabilizing the company. Morale was low, trust shaken, and the rumor mill was still churning like machinery out of control. I held a meeting with the entire staff. No scripts, no manufactured enthusiasm, just honesty. "I can't pretend the last few months didn't break something in all of us," I said. "But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The room was quiet, but not cold. Over the next weeks, I focused on repairing what Mason had tainted. I called clients personally, explaining the situation without airing family dirty laundry. Some were surprisingly understanding. Others admitted they always felt something was off about Mason but didn't know how to say it. One longtime partner even said, "Your father trusted you for a reason. We're staying." Those words stuck with me more than they knew. Inside the company, I implemented stricter compliance checks, transparent accounting procedures, and open-door communication. I wanted no shadows left for lies to hide in. Slowly, employees began stopping by my office again. Not out of fear, but to offer support, ask questions, share ideas. For the first time since Dad passed, the company felt alive again, like it was healing. Meanwhile, Mason sat in jail awaiting trial. Occasionally, news trickled in. His lawyer dropping him, Kara disappearing, more evidence surfacing. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't laugh or feel vindicated. All I felt was tired. But every night when I locked up the office and turned off the lights, I whispered a quiet promise into the empty air. "I'm rebuilding this, Dad, and I won't let anyone destroy it again." The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see whether justice would finally tip in the right direction. I sat behind the prosecution table, hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached. Mason sat across the room in his suit, thinner than before, hair messier, eyes dimmed. But even now, even here, he carried that smugness like a second skin, like he still believed he could charm his way out of anything. When the judge took his seat, the room settled into a hush. The prosecution laid out everything: the forged documents, the shell companies, the threats to employees, the bribes to the lawyer. Piece after piece, they built the story of a man desperate for control, willing to destroy anyone in his way, including his own brother. At one point, they played the recording of Mason threatening Erica. His voice filled the room. "He's going down either way." A few people in the courtroom audibly gasped. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand, feeling like my legs were made of sand. But when I looked at the judge and took a breath, something in me steadied. I told them everything: Dad's trust, Mason's resentment, the months of sabotage, the fear, the humiliation, the betrayal. When I finished, the courtroom was silent, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind where truth hangs heavy in the air. Mason's attorney tried, desperately, to twist the narrative. He claimed I'd manipulated the will, that I forged evidence, that Mason was the true victim. But it all fell apart when the prosecution brought out one last piece of evidence: a financial trail showing Mason had used the stolen money to try to hire someone to hack deeper into the company's systems. Even Mason's lawyer looked blindsided. The judge leaned forward, expression sharp. "Mason Carter," he said, "your actions show a pattern of calculated deception and greed. This court finds you guilty on all charges." Mason's face finally broke. Rage, disbelief, fury, twisting all at once. He stood, shouting, "This isn't over. He took everything from me. Officers grabbed him, pulling him back down. As he was led away, his eyes met mine, wild, betrayed, desperate. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small under his gaze. The day after the verdict, I walked into Dad's office, my office now, and just stood there for a long time. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts of all the years we'd spent building this place together. For the first time in months, the room didn't feel suffocating or tense. It felt like closure, like I'd finally stepped out of Mason's shadow and back into my own life. I sank into the leather chair and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the day Dad died. The company was mine again. Fully, legally, undeniably. Mason's shares had been seized to repay the damages caused by his fraud. His name was removed from the company registry, from the website, from every document he had once bragged about being part of. Clients who'd pulled away began returning with cautious optimism. Employees who once avoided me now stopped by with genuine words like, "I'm glad you're back." And for the first time, the weight of running this company didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a calling. Still, as grateful as I was, the victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted bittersweet, like something you earn through fire instead of celebration. One afternoon, I drove to the cemetery and visited Dad's grave. I knelt beside the headstone, brushing away a stray leaf. "Dad," I whispered, "I did it. I protected what you built. I protected us." A breeze rustled the nearby trees, and for a moment I let myself believe he was proud. I didn't visit Mason in jail. I didn't write him. I didn't ask how he was doing. Some people think that's cruel, but they don't understand. Sometimes peace isn't forgiveness. Sometimes peace is simply distance. A week later, I got a letter from the prison addressed in Mason's handwriting. I didn't open it. I set it in my desk drawer, unopened, a quiet reminder that some endings don't need closure. They just need to stay closed. As I locked up the office that night, the air felt different. Lighter, balanced, mine. Dad gave me everything he had, and I nearly lost it all. But now, I own the company, the legacy, and the life Mason tried to steal. And he sits exactly where he put himself.